By the time the drums fell silent, the last thing heard wasn't war, but memory. Not a memory written in books, a memory written in blood and breath, and names that still linger in the mouths of strangers. They didn't fear us because we were broken. They feared us because we remembered who we were before the world taught us to forget. This is Voices of the Forgotten, where Africa's lost stories rise again. From silence, from ashes, from spirit. They always told us that Africa needed saving, but they never explained from what. Before the sound of conquest, before the flags, before the Bible was handed out with the gun behind it, Africa was already living, already naming stars, aligning temples, harvesting energy, and speaking with rivers. There were kings who ruled by dreams, not coins. Queens who went to war with the fire of heaven braided into their hair. Priests who summoned wind. Fishermen who talked to waves before casting nets. Africa wasn't what the world called a threat. We were what they called too ready, too confident, too advanced, too independent. Because we didn't ask permission to exist. That is where the threat began. They feared what they couldn't take, because how do you colonize a people who serve gods that don't answer to you? How do you own land where the trees are named after ancestors? How do you conquer minds where knowledge is inherited in trance? You rewrite the story. You rename the gods, shame the traditions, and call the wisdom witchcraft. That's how you bury a world without touching it. And so began the deepest war. Not against skin, not even against soil, but against memory. There is a village in the Delta region of Nigeria where the people still whisper about a time before time, when children spoke in tongues before they were taught to speak, and drums told stories no one could write. Stories of fire that didn't burn, of trees that bled, of women who disappeared into rivers and came back with gold in their hands and silence in their eyes. The elders don't speak of it aloud. They just say, "We were not waiting to be discovered. We were disturbed." History tells you Africa had no systems, but the Dogon tracked Sirius B before telescopes existed. The Kushites aligned pyramids not for beauty, but for prophecy. The Mali Empire had universities in Timbuktu, while Europe was still burning its thinkers. They told us we were naked, but forgot our fabrics could summon rain. They told us we were primitive, but we were simply unbothered by greed. You see, Africa was feared not because it was empty, but because it was full. Full of power, full of symmetry, full of knowing. Here's what they never taught you. Africans had spiritual governance. Places like Ife and Oyo weren't ruled solely by kings, but by diviners, by balance, by shrines older than cities themselves. In those courts, a man could not be convicted until the oracles were read. A dispute was not resolved without consulting the ancestors. Justice was not punishment, it was restoration. You don't fear a lawless people. You fear a people whose laws came from places you do not understand. Spiritual law is terrifying
when you cannot manipulate it? Why were we called wild? Because we could not be tamed, not by crosses, not by coins, not by crowns. They say France invaded Dahomey in 1890, but before bullets arrived, legends say the Mino warriors gathered in silence. Women, not with tears, but with blades kissed by ritual. Their skin painted in symbols, their minds empty, not of thought, but of fear. And they walked forward, barefoot over broken earth, like spirits in flesh. When a French soldier asked, "Do they not value life?" another whispered, "No, they value something deeper." A woman who does not fear death threatens systems gated by fear. A nation that listens to its ancestors threatens empires built on forgetting. That is what Africa was and still is, a living threat to structures that survive on disconnection. So they renamed us tribes, heathens, third world, because the only way to own power is to convince it that it is powerless. They extracted our sacred knowledge and called it science, turned our cosmologies into myth, packaged our herbs into pharmaceuticals and called them discoveries. They sold back what was taken, but never paid the price. History says Christianity saved us. But what do you call it when salvation requires the burning of every god you ever knew? If the cost of light is blind obedience, what kind of shadow are you standing in? They told us to abandon ritual. But we are ritual, breath, movement, naming your child after your dreams, tying red cloths to trees not for decoration, but for protection. They told us these acts were superstition. But when a European paints their home with prayer, it's art. When we do it beneath the moon, it's madness. Madness is only madness when it belongs to someone you don't understand. The war was never about inferiority. It was about incompatibility. Africa could not fit into a system designed to consume everything that cannot be categorized. So how do you defeat what does not depend on you? You turn its truth into shame. You outlaw the drum. You beat the language out of the child. You hang mirrors where shrines used to be. You replace the ancestors' name with the colonizers, and you call that civilization. But the spirit never forgets its origin. Generations later, in Brazil, Haiti, Cuba, and the Deep South, children who never stepped foot in Africa dream of rivers. They find themselves humming songs they don't remember learning. They feel things trembling in their bones when the beat drops just right. This is not coincidence. It is remembrance. What you call intuition, some call inheritance. Vodun never died. It just changed clothes. Santeria, Candomblé, Obeya, Hoodoo, each one a fragment carried across oceans by people whose chains could not reach their soul. Why are black people still feared across the world? Because we haven't fully forgotten yet. Because something inside us still walks without asking for permission. Even in chains, we were a threat because the chain cannot contain what is unseen. They felt it, and many still do. A power that does not need validation terrifies systems built on control. That's why we were seen as beasts, not because we were wild, but because we were untamed. That's why our drums were banned, not because they were loud, but because they spoke. That's why in every corner of the globe, blackness is turned into target, not because it is weak, but because it holds the blueprint of resistance. We are the memory the world is built over. No matter how many books they burn, no matter how many names they strip, no matter how many borders they draw, Africa continues. In stomachs that know when to dance, in tongues that pray without language, in dreams that scream with songs unrecorded.
Oh, you ask, why were Africans always seen as a threat? Because we knew who we were, long before we were told who to be. Because we could hear God without building a tower. Because we remembered each other without needing to speak. That kind of unity terrifies control. That kind of memory cannot be killed. The threat was never in the weapons. The threat was in the woman pouring palm oil on the ground before planting, in the boy who dreams and wakes up speaking names no one told him, in the elder who smiles when thunder cracks, not out of fear, but recognition. If you've ever felt like something inside you survived a fire you cannot remember, you're not imagining it. You are the living proof that they failed. Because the spirit of Africa does not ask for survival, it ensures it. And to this day, no matter how far we run, no matter what names we wear, Africa waits. Not in museums, but in mirrors, in the beat of your chest, the heat in your belly, the feeling that your story is older than your name. And the closer you come to remembering it, the more the world will shake, because memory, true memory, is more powerful than fear, and those who carry it cannot be colonized. Not truly, not ever. Do you believe this story was just a myth or a buried truth? If your ancestors ever told you a story like this, whisper it in the comments. Maybe you carry a forgotten thread. Maybe your bloodline isn't sleeping, just waiting to be heard. Subscribe to Voices of the Forgotten, because our stories don't die. They wait.